about performance vision without having some words of wisdom from an amazing performance vision pioneer, Dr. Charles Shidlovsky. And just the short time we've been putting this event on, I have really learned a lot. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, so he took the time out of his really busy schedule to do this interview just a couple of days ago, and I'm excited to share it with you. So here we go.
Good.
All right, so we'll get started now. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to have you here. Have here with me Dr. Charles Shidlovsky. Dr. Shidlovsky, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Excellent. It's a pleasure to be here on this snow day in Texas.
Yeah. So, Dr. Shidlovsky, I know that you have a practice there in, is it Houston?
No, it's Plano, Texas, near Dallas.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your practice and what you do there.
Well, our practice is purely a specialty practice. It kind of has about 4 or 5 different areas that we are involved with. First of all, it's 95% referral. We don't take any vision plans. So it's unique in that way also. But our main practice focus is pediatric and developmental vision. So we work with a lot of kids, for instance, with neurological issues such as autism and ADD and ADHD and dyslexia and genetic disorders and learning-related vision problems and strabismus and amblyopia. And then we also do a lot of myopia management as well. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of kids, and kids develop myopia these days. So it's just kind of a natural progression of our therapeutic interventions to do that. Obviously, we do vision therapy and vision rehabilitation for that population as well. And then we also have a large population of patients who've had traumatic or acquired brain injury. So that can be brain injury, it could be stroke, it could be concussion. It can be a lot nowadays, a lot of immunological disorders like related to COVID or COVID vaccine for that matter. So a variety of different sources. We're on staff at 2 hospitals in the Dallas area, Baylor Scott and White Institute for Rehabilitation, both in Frisco, Texas, and in Dallas, Texas. So we actually go into the hospital one day a week and see patients in each of these hospitals. So we also do, so we in a sense we also do hospital-based well, which has been really kind of an interesting element to get optometry involved in hospitals. So and then from there we also do dry eye because virtually all my brain injury patients have dry eye. So
you don't sleep, basically, is what you're saying. You do
right,
24/7 optometry.
right. What we don't do is primary care. A lot of primary care anyway. We do a little bit just because people want us to, but we don't do much primary care. The bulk of our day is spent in the specialty areas only.
Well, you said a lot there that's so interesting that I want to go back to, but you said one thing that really stood out to me, and I'm sure it's standing out to a lot of our listeners, especially those that are coming here from the optometry field. With all these great specialties that you're doing, you mentioned you don't typically work within managed care. Was that decision just organic, or what was it that kind of put you in this very unique position where you're working with a lot of private pay patients very successfully in these, what I guess is considered to be niches? And I'm sure you'll agree with me, they're not really niches. There's huge needs here, but getting away from that managed care model is something a lot of optometrists are looking to do. How did you get there?
Well, first of all, the one area I forgot to mention also was sports vision. I'm very involved in sports vision. And it's like I just bypass the whole thing. But once again, that's another vision rehabilitation element, and it's another, a development of skills element that we do. How did we get here? Like everybody else, I always had an interest in vision therapy. So I started out working with a lot of kids at first. Actually, my first patient was myself because I had a lot of visual processing problems. It was discovered when I was in optometry school. I always tell the story that, I was in my first year optometry class and my lab partner said, something's going on with your eyes. And she called over the professor and the professor said, son, you're going down to the vision therapy clinic today. I said, what's vision therapy? Because I had no idea what it was. So that was how I got my start. So basically I went through a little vision therapy when I was at school, didn't have a whole lot of time for it. But when I got out of school, I started working on figuring myself out, figuring out my eyes, what made my eyes work better. And I really kind of evolved my own therapy programs based on what I knew at that point in time. And when a child would come into my office, it was a general primary care office, and they had similar symptoms, I would say, hey, let's try this out. This is something I've done for myself, and it made a big difference. And lo and behold, what I did for myself obviously worked for others. So people started referring people to me, and so for many years. In fact, I worked for an ophthalmologist for a while, and I was doing this type of care even in his office. I probably had the only vision therapy clinic in an ophthalmology office ever. Um, and which is pretty unusual, but the ophthalmologist who was there was pretty open-minded, and I said to him, I said, you can talk to any of my patients and see what you think. And after a few months, he said, just keep doing what you're doing because it's obviously working. So I did vision therapy there, and then about 20 years ago, I just decided that this is where my focus needed to be. And so I was already seeing a lot of kids on the spectrum. I was already seeing a lot of ADHD. I was already seeing a lot of kids with visual processing issues. So I opened my own practice, and then about 6 months into my own practice, I got a call from a rehabilitation center here in Dallas. Said, hey, can we send some of our brain injury patients to you? And here I was. I opened my doors to my new office, and I said, sure, I have time. And and basically said, I'll figure it out. And I started seeing brain injury patients, about 20 years ago. And obviously now brain injury become half my practice virtually. So it's really kind of evolved. Just because I was willing to take chances on things, I think things happen. I didn't have to accept the status quo on things, and I allowed myself to open myself up to opportunities in these fields so I can expand into it. That's kind of also how we got into dry eye, because I started seeing an opportunity because I saw, hey, all my brain injury patients have dry eye. What am I going to do about it? I jumped into myopia management because I was seeing a lot of kids. So I always kept myself open to these opportunities, and to go from there. And then obviously opportunities jump out, and we'll talk a little bit more later about the visual snow study I did. And now visual snow is kind of a big growth area for our practice as well.
And it's unbelievable. Now, I have to be honest with you. It's interesting. You and I have bumped into each other 3 separate times, both related to projects that I was working on with the Myopia Summit. And then I actually found out about visual snow from outside of the industry from a patient who reached out to me because she saw me working on the metaverse and thought, can you help us to communicate our message? She introduced me to the president of the Visual Snow, who's actually a father of a daughter who had this condition. And lo and behold, he said, I'm already working with someone in your industry. I said, oh, who is that? He said, Charles Shedlovsky. And then, of course, we started working on this Performance Vision Summit related to sports and gaming vision. I learned that you were like the guy. So it's very interesting that these 3 or 4, if you separate gaming and sports, myopia, sports vision, gaming and vision, visual snow, these are considered niches. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of people that mistakenly think visual snow is a rare disease. It really isn't. Is it like 3% of the population and growing has it? Do you know the statistic there?
It's estimated to be 1 to 2% of the population. And even if it was 1/2 of 1%, you know how many people that is? It's crazy to think about how many people actually have these symptoms. So whether it's 1 or 2%, I don't think it's material. I think it's immaterial. I think the fact is there are a lot of people out there with it.
Right.
Uh,
Well, and it's just this understanding that this is not a niche. Children. I mean, you started with children. And before I go to that, you said something very profound to me. And I actually was Dr. Lamont, who's putting this event together, and Dr. Antonyan, who got over 2 million followers on TikTok talking about binocular vision. They got together and they were kind of talking about how they got started. And one of the things Dr. Antonyan and Dr. Lamont said is they were evaluated for binocular vision earlier on, I think even in the school setting like you did, and it really got them passionate about the subject. So I wonder how many professionals, eye care professionals, optometrists have never been assessed for binocular vision themselves. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, I think most optometrists have been assessed back when they were in school, because that's probably the only time they assessed it. But after that, it really wasn't something that, when they got into general practice, they really, in fact, actually ran a poll a couple of years ago. I was speaking at a local optometric society meeting, and I asked how many people in there do a near point of convergence test and how many people do an accommodation test. And of the 65 people in the room, I think 4 hands went up. So a lot of people are just not even testing for it. And if you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't look for it, you don't know. So how do you discover it? And so I think more general optometrists really need to think about just doing a basic 30-second evaluation to figure out what's going on in the binocular vision, what's the binocular vision status. Remember, it's not about two eyeballs, it's about a human being that's attached to those two eyeballs and a brain that's attached to those two eyeballs. So I think it's really, we have to really take that into consideration, and stop, sometimes we get locked down too much and just what's the refraction, how's the eye health, and we're done. We really need to understand that vision leads motor, vision leads the body. So we have to make sure that our binocular system is working well, as in addition to our in addition to our eyesight, for that matter.
Well, and I want to connect some very important dots going back to children and vision. So I know for a fact, in speaking with optometrists all over the country in all different states, that pediatric vision is not really a specialty that's widely practiced. It seems to be like there's like one specialized pediatric optometrist within a given, county, let alone a zip code. It doesn't seem like there's a lot, and you could probably clarify that. But I think one of the major reasons is there's this idea that, because children are typically through insurance, there's somebody who does that. It's hard for practices to imagine focusing on a pediatric practice. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, you want to take care of your patients, but you want to have a profitable business as well. And you mentioned you don't take a lot of managed care. So how did you go from focusing on kids to now working in a practice where you have a lot of private pay patients? Because don't a lot of kids typically come through managed care programs?
Well, let's kind of separate out managed care. Some people call managed care vision service plan, IMED, things like that. And then there's the medical managed care, which is Blue Cross Blue Shield, United, Cigna, things like that. Now, we do take the medical plans. Um, However, we have to have a medical diagnosis. So obviously, if we see someone with convergence insufficiency, ocular motor dysfunction, visual spatial disorientation, any of those types of diagnoses, that would fall under the medical. So we do take medical for that. However, a lot of times our evaluations take much more than the 20, 30 minutes a typical evaluation takes. So we do have an out-of-pocket that we charge in our office, and we explain it to the patient in advance that it's not covered by any type of plan. And that's where we can access things like uh, visual perceptual skills. We can do, electronic eye tracking tests. We can do developmental testing, cognitive testing, things of that nature. So there are some additional types of tests we love to do to kind of figure out the child, to do a really comprehensive evaluation. That's not going to be covered by traditional insurance, but that doesn't mean. But that means what we do is we'll charge the insurance for what it covers, and then they'll pay out of pocket. So it's kind of a hybrid system more than anything else. Does that make sense?
It really does. And, as I do have a child who, at a much older age, she was assessed for strabismus, amblyopia, and I was too late dealing with it. And she had perfect vision in school. She was screened in the school and with her pediatrician. She had 20/20 vision. I had no clue that this child was legally blind in one eye. So I think there's a lot of parents out there who just think, okay, my kid's young. Why go through the extra doctor of going to an optometrist if there's nothing going on? The pediatrician would tell me if I need to, take it a step further. And I know better now, but I think there's a lot of parents who think if the pediatrician in the school is telling me my kids have perfect vision, then maybe I don't need to get this assessed. But there's so many other things that this is missing. And I think this is the message parents need to understand, is that every kid needs all of these tests done, because this is how you detect all sorts of things in children, behavioral disorders, with kids in sports, with concussions. Talk a little bit about how you came up with this recipe of tests, this array of tests, and how does a doctor wanting to offer these tests know how to add on to these tests that they would typically do that are covered, maybe creating an out-of-pocket suite of services like that.
Well, first of all, kids are smart too. And what happens is a lot of times they'll do the eye chat test, they'll memorize the letters, they'll switch eyes and say the same letters. And that's what's wrong with school screenings. They're really not effective. They're effective to some degree, but a lot of people can fake them, if you
I
will,
never even thought
and
about that. That's very interesting.
and
So they memorize.
misguide it. Yeah, because they were using a single line eye chart. So you read it once, you read it a
Yeah.
second, you remember some of the letters, you read it the second. And then they, so things get missed a lot in screenings, but you also catch some things. But don't forget, take that child who's significantly farsighted. Okay, they could see the distance eye chart, right? Because they're far, even if they're significantly far, they could see probably pass the eye chart test, but they probably would fail a vision screening, a true vision screening when you're looking at it. Or say a child with astigmatism, a significant amount of stigma. Yeah, they might get to 20/40, 20/30 with their astigmatism, but really they're struggling. So that's the problem with just reading an eye chart, and that's what's the problem with the typical school-based test. Is it doesn't really give us enough information. They have to take it to we have the tools now. They should be able to take it to the next level. I mean, there's handheld autorefractors that every school should have.
And
Figure out,
pediatricians, right? I mean,
right.
because don't forget, like pediatricians, I don't think, no, I mean, it's funny. I don't remember. I think it was Dr. Lamont. He spoke with a pediatrician, and, he asked them what they did during the eye exam, and they explained they look with the, as ophthalmoscope. Is that what that's called? Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, do you know what you're looking at? She said, no, I'm just, going through the motion. So I think even just, have you ever worked with pediatrics before to kind of, because I'm sure you see that gap. You're somebody who likes to close gaps. Have you tried to educate pediatricians so they understand how to do a better job screening?
As a whole, pediatricians are an interesting bunch. They're very traditional medicine based. So their referral pattern would not be to optometry. It's typically
Yeah.
to ophthalmology. And that's part of the problem because once again, it's you're not really getting that good binocular vision evaluation when you go there. Um, but not to take anything from ophthalmology because I refer to ophthalmology all the time. So I'm
Mhm.
not taking anything, but they're not going to do a binocular vision exam. That's not part of what their training is. That's not part of what they do. Um, so I think realistically, sure, we have pediatricians that refer to our office regularly. More the developmental pediatricians because they get it a little bit more than the
Mhm.
standard pediatricians. But the problem is as hard as I've tried. I mean, I could tell you the story when went to my kid's pediatrician whose office was virtually across the street from my office. And I told him about what we're doing, and he should refer some of his kids to us for care and everything like that. And I never saw one kid because he just didn't buy into it because he had to refer it off to the ophthalmologist because that was his pattern. That's the only thing he was taught. And unfortunately, we got to break that mold. There's certain areas of medicine like that, but I get plenty of referrals from psychiatry and psychology, and actually, one of my biggest referral sources nowadays is neurology. I get about 15 to 20 neurology referrals a month. Um, so I think people are no pun intended, but people's eyes are being opened now a little bit more to it. Um, and I think a lot of the reason why is just because we've been pretty proactive. We're in the hospital now too, which I think really opens some doors in that way. Say, oh, he's on staff at the hospital, maybe there's something to this. Um,
Oh,
but
definitely.
but still, I think it's too few and far between in our field to have that happen. You really have to work over some of these pediatricians to get them even to refer you a patient or two. Some people have had more success than others, and I said I've had some success, but it's not an easy thing. I think being in a big city like Dallas, area like the Dallas area, like I'm in, sometimes it makes it more challenging because there's plenty of all types of practitioners in the area. So
And
um,
it's
in a
very
way, it's a challenge.
interesting. this event is being put on by Children in Vision Development. And when we started putting this event together, it was all about pediatric vision, binocular vision, kids in vision. We weren't getting a whole lot of buy-in, unfortunately. The moment we shifted the focus onto performance and talking about sports and vision and gaming and vision and, visual snow and vision, there was so much more buy-in because for some reason, I think that's something people understand a lot more. But I think what we really need to realize is that kids have completely different lifestyles. And it's really, I think every optometrist should really try to focus on learning, about kids and vision, because how are you going to learn about adults? Because these kids are going to become adults someday. The problems that you're going to see them with when they're adults are going to start when they're kids. And those are going to be influenced by technologies and all sorts of things now that you've got to get a better understanding of. It's because you're on every side of this. You're on the technology side, you're on the sports side, you're on the kids and vision side. What have you seen in that kind of journey where you can shed some light on this for eye care providers?
Well, let's take it one at a time. Let's start with esports, for instance.
Okay.
Esports has become a very popular sport. In fact, at the International Sports Vision Association, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, we've actually, the last 3 years, have had lectures on esports, on how to help performance in esports. And so esports, obviously, there's a lot, even though it's not a dynamic athletic event. Visual skills are incredibly important for esports, and also teaching them to know when to give yourself a break is also an important piece of the puzzle. But
Which they don't know.
which they don't know, and so just educating them, having them in the right lenses, can be a huge thing. I mean, I have several of my esports athletes wearing neuro lenses, or anti-fatigue lenses, because it just helps them in their particular activity. So choosing the right lens is a big piece of it. The right tints, the right anti-reflective coating. Do we use blue blocker? Do we not use blue blocker? I mean, that becomes a big question. But interesting enough, just from my work with some esports athletes, we're working on an incredibly cool project that's really going to bring it to the forefront, I hope. And that is, I'm working on in development with a esports athlete, a reality TV show based on training esports athletes. And so we have some Green Berets, we have nutritionists, we have a psychologist, and I'll be there doing vision training with them. And we have a variety of different professionals. We're going to treat them like an Olympic athlete, for that matter. And we're gonna train their skills, their whole body skills, to see if we can really improve their performance. Because let's face it, a lot of these esports athletes sit in front of the screen 10 hours a day eating Cheetos. And so really helping them with their diet is just a huge
Well, and
step
just light
forward for them.
exposure, which is something
Uh,
I'm working on. But
Yeah.
it's really interesting. I had a conversation today, not related to esports, but in the gaming world, with somebody who, they saw what we were doing with the metaverse and everything, and they were like, "This is really cool. I want to talk to you about somebody I met recently." They have been in headsets for the last 5 years. So since they started, they've been spending 8 to 10 years in headsets. And recently, we went to his eye doctor, and they said, "You've got the eyes of a 60-year-old man, and this
Mhm.
guy's in his 20s." So, the question is, and I don't know if that means that they were developing cataracts or something like that, because I didn't get the diagnosis, but I mean, have we even begun to think about the impacts of some of this on how it's going to age, our visual system?
Well, certainly. I think we don't know that yet because esports is relatively new, so we don't have any long-term studies on that. Certainly, but you can imagine, we can imagine certainly the fatigability of the accommodative system, where they're losing accommodation and things of that nature. But don't forget, an esports environment, even under a virtual reality headset, is a false environment. It's not a true environment. And the brain is pretty smart. It knows these things. Even though it's simulating a distance environment, you're not in a distance environment. So we have to make accommodations for that, as part of developing the skills. And they have to know, hey, it's important to take a break and get yourself out of the headset. You know, once esports have been explained to me by my good friend, Travis, who's directing that TV show. He says you either have a sprint or a marathon. So the sprints are games that take 4 minutes, and the marathons take 20, 25 minutes. But that means they have time for a break. So they should use that time. no matter whether they're in a sprint or a marathon for that matter. And so, so I think there's a lot that could be learned and a lot that could be gleaned from how do we help them develop their skills properly? How do we help a child who's just getting into these type of, gaming type scenarios and make their visual system much more efficient? And as I said, this is about performance vision. How do we make them perform at a higher level from a visual
Exactly.
standpoint, so that they can sustain and do the things that they need to do? So, I think that's certainly a thing which kind of brings you into the realm of sports vision because it is a part of the realm of sports vision. And sports vision is where, once again, for the athlete, and I work with a couple professional sports teams. So I work with, two hockey teams, two professional hockey teams. I work with a baseball team. I work with the professional soccer team here in Dallas. And, we want to get their visual skills to the highest level of performance too. So what are the proper ways to do it? What's the proper contact lens to fit for them? What is the proper, what are the proper activities they should do to prime their eyes for their game? How does their eye tell them where they are in space during the game? These guys are moving at high rates of speed quite frequently. So how do they stabilize their visual system also? How do they make their eyes quiet, if you will? And that's part of the reason about 10 years ago we formed the International Sports Vision Association, because there was lack of focus in the industry on sports vision. So myself and my good friend Dr. Alexandrich and Benoit Lambert from Belgium, we sat down one day and we said, we need to do something about this. We need to get all the vendors in one room. We need to get all the people in one room talking. And we formed the International Sports Vision Association. And when this is seen, the previous week before this, we'll have our 8th annual Sports Vision meeting, which is really exciting. We're doing it right here in Frisco, Texas, near Dallas. And we've done previous ones in San Diego and Orlando and Park City, Utah. So we definitely are excited about having this. And certainly if there's a doc out there who's interested in sports vision, they should go to the website sportsvision.pro and join our organization and take part in it. But even if you're an athlete listening to this show and you want to learn more about it, or an athletic trainer or someone involved in athletics, go to that website and find out some more about it, because understanding how vision impacts sports is a huge piece of the puzzle. And then lastly, on the sports vision side of things, what about protecting our eyes? That's another big important point. Okay, what can we do for eye protection in situations,
Especially for kids,
obviously,
right?
especially for kids, if they're not contact lens wearer and they're baseball players, should they wear their regular glasses? Absolutely not. They need to be in sports glasses. That's the only thing that's going to protect them, because if they get hit with the baseball on the side of the head, their glasses will break and they can damage their eye. I've seen it before. It's not pretty. So obviously finding the right sports eyewear becomes very important. And then as they get older, perhaps the right contact lens. And the concept of fitting a contact lens might be totally different than fitting a regular person with a contact lens. So you have to, this is part of what we train at our meetings is here's how we do these things. Then we teach you, and here's how you train them to get better. And there was an important study done about 10 years ago that from the University of Cincinnati, and it worked with the Cincinnati football team. And what they found out is that if they did vision training in their off season, the rate of concussion went down almost 8%. Could you even
Wow.
imagine that? Because they were able to anticipate getting hit or what have you quicker, so they were able to avoid things much more
And
rapidly.
concussion, we didn't talk a lot about this, but I watched that movie. What was the movie with Will Smith where they talked
Concussion.
about, oh, was that the name of it? Oh
Yeah.
my God. I was blown away. And I'll tell you what really blew me away about that movie is I don't think that even though Will Smith did a movie on this, I don't think there's enough awareness around this. There's a lot of kids playing football, and I mean, I'm a mom, so I'm always about the kids, but adults too. And I think because and I'm not no doctor here, but forgive me if I'm wrong. Isn't contrast sensitivity a really good way to indicate early stages of post-concussive syndrome?
Actually, it is a good way, but ocular motor skills is really probably the best way. In fact, there's an optometric test that's been around for 35, 40 years called the King Divic test. And the King Divic test is actually kept on the sidelines of games because it's a remove from play game test, and it's simply an eye movement test. So you do a baseline, and then if they get hit in the head during the game, you repeat the test on the sideline, and if they do significantly worse, you take them out of the game. And it's a well-known test for that. It's now done on an iPad, and unfortunately, they put it on an iPad now so they can charge people money for this test. It used to be a paper test. I wish it was still a paper test, but still an effective test. And looking at eye movements is still a very effective. There's another test called BOMS that's used by athletic trainers that they're trained in their trainings, and it's basically eye movements, pursuits and saccades and near point of convergence and motion sensitivity. I mean, that's a BOMS test. So that's what they're even training in athletic trainers now. Eye movements are one of the first thing that goes in a concussion.
And you're talking about all these specialties. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this clearly. Any optometrist can put a focus on a sports vision or a performance vision or a pediatric vision component of their practice, right? There's no specific additional certification needed, or is there? I'm not 100% sure. I figured it would be good to clarify that.
Yeah. Everyone has the skills. When they go to optometry school, you learn all this stuff, top to bottom. Okay. Some schools do better jobs than other schools in teaching it, but everyone learns at least the basics, so that they're on the optometry boards, for that matter, all these different areas. Now there are many optometrists who, I don't want to see kids. I don't have to see kids. I don't want to do sports vision. They don't have to do sports vision. Now, are there additional certifications? Obviously, there's fellowship in the College of Optometrics and Vision Development, which means you went through an additional testing through the fellowship, and not very easy testing, by the way, very difficult, process, but very worthwhile process. NORA, the Neuro-Optometric Rehabilitation Association, also has a fellowship program. Ultimately, you have to produce a published article in the area of neuro-optometric care to gain that fellowship. I can tell you the International Sports Vision Association is working on starting a fellowship program, and will probably be available in the next within the next 2 years. I think we'll have a fellowship program through that. So there are additional training programs that you can do, or levels of care, that you can do. The thing I always tell people, it's very hard to dabble in things. It's like I see these people who do myopia management, but they may do one a month or something like that, and that's dabbling, and it's hard to get good at something if you
Oh,
dabble.
sure.
Yeah, always been a big believer is that if you do something, you do it the right way. So you get involved, you learn as much as you can, you do it the right, you kind of build it and do it because you're committed to doing it. And I do think that's really important. So dabblers in sports vision, hey, my kid plays on an athletic team, I'll do a little sports vision. Well, that's a good way to start, but really you should want to do it beyond that. That's kind of my take on it, is you really should go beyond that. So I think that's some important points is, if you want to do something, do it the right way and do it all the way. And I think that really will make it much more. I think you'll enjoy it much more. Also, you got to be passionate about it. If you're not passionate about it, then you shouldn't do it.
I think that's such a good point. And I think the fact that you have such a successful practice, you're working on this series, you've got the International Sports Vision Association, NORA, you're still taking time for this. I really commend you, because we all struggle with finding time, but you mentioned something to me offline. You said, I just try not to say no. I try to say yes to new things. And, I think a lot of times, even myself, I get stuck in this kind of pattern. And when I find myself just challenging myself and saying, okay, let me try something new, all these opportunities open up that you would have never even expected. It sounds like from where you started to where you are today, although you've taken some pivots, you kind of had an unexpected journey, but it sounds like you're really in love with what you do. I could just see it in your face when you talk about these things. And that's just really inspiring.
I do call myself the accidental tourist. Because everything kind of just evolved on its own, and I kind of let it, but I'm passionate about it. I'm in practice 33 years, and I love to go to work every day. In fact, I'm sitting here bummed at home today because I can't be in my office seeing patients where I should be.
Now
But
oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of even how the visual snow thing came about because I
I
had
was
one
just going to go
patient with
there.
it. Yeah, I had one patient with it who had a diagnosis of it. Now, it's not that I didn't hear these complaints before for years. I would, and I, you know, it's when that college baseball player came in who had visual snow. I said, yeah, I've heard this complaint for years. I didn't know it had a name. And and then what ended up happening, he was playing college ball in South Carolina, and at the end, and his season ended because of COVID. And I had treated him the summer before that, so summer of 2020, I had treated him, and didn't even know how he was doing. And then I get a call from his mother. Hey, he just finished, his year, and the conference wrote an article about him, which kind of ballooned because it went to the local news stations. Ultimately, it went to ESPNU, and then finally Sports Illustrated wrote an article about him. Believe me, that's the only time I'll ever show up in Sports Illustrated. I promise. But so and then everyone started calling me and saying, "Okay, what are you doing?" And ultimately, an organization called Visual Snow Initiative reached out to me and said, "Hey, tell me what you're doing." Well, we have another doctor in Southern California doing something very similar. Let's put you two together. So Dr. Sang and I talked and met and said, we don't know if we have lightning in a bottle. We don't know what we have, but I think it bears studying and seeing if there's something to this. And so we put together this study that we did that was published uh, in November in Frontiers of Neurology, which was kind of a change of pace anyway, because most optometrists publish in optometry journals. But I felt like, and we felt like as a whole, we really wanted to be able to be on PubMed and published in a neurology journal. But we wrote this article about vision rehabilitation as a treatment for visual snow syndrome. And what the study said is that we were able to certainly improve their quality of life by doing vision rehabilitation activities. So now what we're doing is we've just started. Our first course was this past weekend. We're starting to teach courses all over, and to teach optometrists and really even ophthalmologists are invited. Anyone in the medical field is invited to the courses, but to teach them about patients with visual snow and what you can do for them. Obviously, we expect mostly optometrists will do most of the work and the treatment, but still in all, we want people to learn about it and understand the nuances of treating these patients because they're quite unique and quite different than your standard patient, and because
Well,
most of them have really high anxiety and depression. They might be suffering from migraines. They might have had concussions, so they have this really complex history that's attached to their visual problems, which is really not visual; it's really neurologic. It's really attached to their
and
neurologic problems.
I think a lot of people don't know that there are so many visual snow sufferers that have gone to their optometrist, and because their optometrist thinks it might be floaters or something unrelated, they a lot of times they get misdiagnosed as a psychiatric condition. That was this young woman I spoke with. They thought that she was like imagining it, and she was just mortified because nobody believed her. And that's something similar that happened to the founder of the initiative. He told me the story of what he was thinking before he met you. He had to go all the way to UK to get answers because he couldn't believe no one in America was dealing with this. And then he found out about you and Dr. Sang, and he was so excited to finally find that there was somebody tackling this. But this is, first of all, this is obviously a tremendous opportunity to help people who don't really even know where to go. And it's also a great opportunity to open up your practice to a whole new market. I mean, we're always talking about wanting this younger millennial and Gen Z audience. The majority of visual snow sufferers and gamers and sports vision, aren't they all in this younger category that optometrists want to work in?
Well, the visual snow patients we saw in the study range from 9 to 60, so there's really
Wow.
no age variability in that. I mean, I think we'll see people. Some people have had it the whole life. Some people it was after an event, after a concussion or after bad migraine headache. something along those lines. Actually, I've had several who were post-COVID. They got COVID, or they got the COVID vaccination, and 2 weeks later they started developing visual snow. So,
Wow.
there's a lot of that, and that's kind of why we put together this course, because we had to show them all the different possibilities within it, because it's so extensive, the range of patient that you can have who has this type of disorder. And then, obviously, but even the baseball player I saw, the original one, he had gone to Switzerland to find out answers. But the problem is, you look at the eyeball and it looks perfectly normal. Okay, you do an MRI, it's perfectly normal. So that's why they thought it was psychiatric, but it really isn't. It's really, the problem is when you do a radiological evaluation of the brain, you're really looking at something from 30,000 feet in an airplane when you need to be on the ground with a magnifying glass. Because the inflammation, it's related potentially, in my thought, it's related to what's the inflammatory nature of the brain that's going on. That's certainly a piece of the puzzle. So I think realistically, you have to understand the neurology of vision largely to understand what's going on in visual snow. And that's kind of why it was important to start teaching about it, to the community. So after this meeting, we're going to go to Sydney, Australia in March. We're going to be in Toronto, Miami, Los Angeles,
Wow, that's
Vancouver,
exciting.
and we're going to try to teach as many doctors how to help these patients, because believe me, I've heard from every continent except Antarctica, but that may happen tomorrow. I don't know. But from patients. So realistically, we need to teach people all over the world how to manage this situation. If it is in fact 2% of the population, or even 1%,
Yeah.
we have to
Well,
teach people how to deal with it, and how to head people into the right direction.
so, most of the people coming to this event are going to be optometrists. A lot of them maybe don't have a performance vision component in their practice. What's your parting message to them if they're considering whether or not this is something they'd like to implement?
Well, I think you really have two choices. Number one is, be aware of it. Let's start with that. Be aware of it. Okay. Number two, you can decide whether you want to do it or not do it. You don't have to do it, but you have to recognize, if you recognize the fact that it exists, okay, and you recognize the fact that, hey, I can potentially help this patient, refer to your optometrist friend who does do it. Okay. One of
That's a
the
great point.
things one of the things that I just never got, as an optometrist, is why optometrists don't refer to other optometrists. Their pattern,
Yeah,
once
it
again,
needs
is to
to
refer to
happen, right?
ophthalmology when it needs to happen. But to me, I much rather refer to an optometrist. Like, for instance, even though I'm glaucoma certified in Texas, I don't like to do glaucoma. So I will refer to it. I have a optometrist friend who loves glaucoma. I'll refer them all to him first. If they're unless they're really complex glaucoma, but your basic glaucoma cases, I'll refer to another optometrist first. Why don't we do that? If you have a person with a binocular vision problem, most people will say, okay, do some pencil push-ups, have a nice day. But pencil push-ups is typically way too hard for that patient to do. If they really need help, they really need a much more broad-based approach. So refer them to your colleague. But we just don't understand that, and it's something I always harp on, is we need to use each other more as sources. I know I always refer the patient back to the referring optometrist when I'm done. That's a big important point, and it should be done that way. Sometimes not
And
by people, but it should
that
be done
was
that way.
that was one of my biggest takeaways when we started doing my vision show, because we're 3 years now, and um, people were discovering each other, like other optometrists, other opticians, like, oh, you're seeing the same thing. Like everybody thinks, oh, well, I think I'm the only one seeing this. And then when they find somebody else who sees the same things and has a similar perspective, they're so excited, because it's so hard. First of all, you can only talk to your loved one. My husband, one day when I was in the kitchen, he tried calling my name 3 times. I didn't answer. He said, glasses. I looked up. Like, our families are sick of hearing us talk about eyeglasses and vision and eyeballs. I talk about this stuff all day long. But when you meet someone else who's very passionate about this, and there's so much to talk about, it is really enjoyable. It is really fun. So I think that's a good point. Finding your people that like are passionate about the same things, and you can learn from each other.
Absolutely. And then if you say it's something you do decide, hey, I'd love to get involved in this. I'd love to be in sports vision. I'd love to do vision therapy. You know, go to courses. That's the best way to go. Go learn. I mean, it's
There's
not
plenty
so
through your
easy just to pick up and
organizations,
do.
right?
There's organizations out the wazoo. There's always continuing education. Even online, there's continuing education a lot. But you got to start somewhere, and I think that's really, really important. Is we really, if you want to learn it. If you want just to understand the basics, hey, I don't want to do this, but I want to understand the basics. Go to a course, do an online course, just to become more knowledgeable about it, so that hey, I can do this to help a person.
Well, I got to tell you, Dr. Shidlovsky, I think we covered quite a range in this short time that we've been together. And, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and your snow day to still, keep immersed in your industry and share your passion with your peers. It's inspiring. And, thank you for being a part of this event with us.
Always a pleasure to do it. I really love what you're doing with the metaverse, and I want you to encourage you to keep going, because look, this is the future. So let's keep the word going, and keep moving this forward, because there's so much that can be offered by this medium now, and we really
Yeah.
need to find good ways to utilize it.
Thank you. You don't know how much that means. And just two last things on that. So, a lot of people saw this Mr. Beast video, right? This guy helped 1,000 people to see. It's all over the news. It was the number one video on YouTube. Do you know how hard it is to be the number one? There are all kinds of people doing all kinds of dances on YouTube, TikTok. Mr. Beast saving 1,000 people's vision through cataract surgery was number one. And when I talk to people about the metaverse, the optical metaverse, they're not excited about the metaverse. They can get that anywhere. They're excited that they're going to have access to vision through a channel that they like. And I really love that you've detected that and you've been a part of this, because you are kind of like a person in the industry who's on both sides, right? You're a part of the traditional and a part of the kind of future of optometry. I think you're doing a great job just creating that portal so that other eye care professionals can really embrace this great opportunity. I mean, we've been wanting people to get excited about their vision for a long time. And I think now that they want to enjoy the metaverse and VR and AR and games, they're going to be more motivated to make sure their performance is the best that it can be.
Totally agree with you. And as a doctor, I think the other important thing, and I mentioned it earlier, is do what you're passionate about doing, and listen to what you're passionate about, because it's going to make you better at what you do. It's going to drive you into new opportunities and new challenges all the time, and that's what keeps life interesting.
Couldn't have said it better. Well, thank you once again. And I look forward to seeing you guys all, later on today at the Performance Vision Summit. And follow Charles. Definitely check out what are your websites, Charles, for your two organizations?
Um, for my two organizations, for it's a sports vision organization, it's sportsvision.pro.
Mhm.
For Nora, it's noravisionrehab.org. But I'm also going to add one more in there, because if you're interested in more information on visual snow, I would say go to visualsnowinitiative.org, which is not my organization, but it's the organization for about visual snow. We have some videos up there, but there are a lot of different types of videos up there talking about visual snow syndrome. So if you want to learn more, that's a great place to go for that.
Sounds great. Thank you once again. You guys have a great rest of your day. Bye.